Kyle, let's go back to the offseason. We released a video on the Los Angeles Clippers, and I'll admit that comment section was not friendly to me. And it was mostly because I pointed out some things that I thought could potentially go wrong with the Los Angeles Clippers. And one of my big things was, I don't think it's safe to just assume that Kawhi Leonard's just going to come back and still be Kawhi Leonard. Well, we got a report from Sports Illustrated that drops about 16 hours ago of this recording that Kawhi Leonard is out indefinitely while he recovers from that ACL injury that he suffered a couple of years ago in the playoffs. And emphasis on the couple years ago. We're a long way removed from that ACL injury. The average recovery time is anywhere between 8 to 12 months. Kawhi Leonard is sitting on that 15, 16-month timetable for his return. And obviously, we've seen him in a couple games this year, but that's been about it. It's been a short-lived return. And the Clippers, they're meandering at 6-5. They got a big win against Cleveland, only Cleveland's second loss of the year. But we don't look at the Clippers and think of them as a championship contender, especially if Kawhi Leonard is not in this lineup. What is the best case scenario for Kawhi Leonard if this ACL injury continues to linger?
That's a great question. I mean, as I am now an expert on, as someone who's done a podcast series and a book about the San Antonio Spurs, I think Kawhi Leonard's knees are kind of the reason why the San Antonio Spurs dynasty ended. Like, this has taken down one team. It's brought a championship to Toronto. It's derailed multiple Los Angeles Clipper runs, whether it be the 2021 team that, again, they could have probably beaten Phoenix in the conference finals with a healthy Kawhi Leonard that year. He got hurt in the second round and didn't play in that series. And then last year, the whole season was a wash because they didn't have Kawhi for the entire year. I mean, Kawhi Leonard's knees have been incredibly influential on the outcomes of the NBA season, shall we say, because Kawhi Leonard has been one of the 20 to 25 greatest players in the history of the NBA, and his 30s have been plagued by injuries that have seemed kind of mysterious in the grand scheme of things.
It gets worse. Ty Lue put out this, and there's not really a timetable for Kawhi's return. They haven't even set a timetable for his return. Obviously, we're assuming best case, we think that he could be back for a playoff run, but we've seen that doesn't really work anymore. You can't just sit out the entire regular season, come into the playoffs and expect to just be playing your A game. It takes some time. It takes some time getting used to the guys on your roster. And those guys, they're getting a lot of significant minutes. Are you just going to take their minutes away and just input Kawhi Leonard while he's dealing with this knee injury? And how many minutes can you even really give him? Because there's going to be a hesitancy when he does inevitably return. How many minutes do we give this guy? Is it 6 minutes? Is it 7 minutes? At what point are we putting too much stress on this knee? And a lot of it is just like witch doctor science. We don't really know the true answer on what the injury threshold is for players. We talked about this. We joked about this when it came to Dave Roberts and Clayton Kershaw, that perfect game that wasn't when he decided to pull him at 80 pitches. Are we saying at the 81st pitch that he would have torn his elbow, Tommy John, been done for the year? We don't know that. We don't know what that is. If, like I told you, the difference between 25 or 26 minutes for Kawhi Leonard, he could tear his ACL again on the first minute of the first game he plays. And that could be all she wrote.
Don't do that to my beloved Kawhi.
I'm hearing reports of tendonitis. I'm hearing reports of tendonitis in the knee. And so, I go back to a guy like Todd Gurley, who at age 26 was out in the National Football League because of that injury.
So this is an interesting case, and I know a little bit about Kawhi Leonard's medical history, but if we're going back, so the reason that the fallout occurred with the San Antonio Spurs was a debate between whether he was suffering from tendinopathy, which is an injury related to the tendon, or whether it was a muscle issue in his quad and his knee. And so this was a thing that was kind of back and forth. He didn't feel comfortable, and ultimately the fallout with the Spurs came because Spurs doctors thought it was one injury. His secondary doctors thought it was another thing. And then it led to a distrust that ultimately spiraled with the players only meeting and Tony Parker's 100 times worse comment and all that stuff. And that was the injury he kept dealing with, was the knee and the quad. When he tore his ACL, it was in the other knee that didn't have the degenerative knee injury issue. So now we're talking about two knee injuries in two separate knees for Kawhi Leonard, one that was a degenerative injury going back years, and the other that's an ACL, which is one of those that's more sporadic and like you can rehab back to a place where you were theoretically. So we're talking about two different injuries here that are very complex. And to your point about them going into the playoffs or late in the season trying to get Kawhi healthy, it's a really interesting situation because part of it is expectations, but the only path to a championship for the Clippers is with a fully healthy and fully at his best Kawhi Leonard, because even with that player, and we talked about this in our preseason video, that's not a guarantee to beat the Nuggets. That's not a guarantee to beat Memphis. Yes. We kind of wrote off Phoenix a little bit earlier. Phoenix has the number 2 ranked defense in the league early in the season this year. And if they play great defense, they're going to be right in the thick at the top because they can score enough points. Like, even fully healthy Kawhi is not a guarantee to win the title or compete for the title.
Yeah. And I don't know if fully healthy Kawhi even exists. Is he always just going to be playing at 80% the rest of his career? 70%, 60%? There's some that say if you're not 100%, then you're basically not able to play. There's a lot of lines of thinking when it comes to injuries and whether or not athletes should brave it through or tough it through. Bottom line is if you set the expectation for Kawhi as one of these all-time great players who came to Los Angeles to win a championship, then you need him to be at the top of his game. And if he's not, then ultimately this is a bust contract for the Clippers. As much as they would hate to admit that, as much as Steve Ballmer and that organization would have to concede the L, put their concession speech in on this Paul George, Kawhi Leonard experiment, it seems like it's already kind of coming towards the tail end, and it didn't even really get a chance to really get going, and mostly because of the injuries we're talking about here. And at a certain point, you have to wonder, will the game just pass him by? Because it passes by so many players when they have to recover from injuries. Like Derrick Rose obviously took him a couple of years coming off his knee. Well, never really the same player after that. But the game flew by Derrick Rose to the point where Derrick Rose couldn't even compete in the same way. And now we're looking at the landscape of the Western Conference. You mentioned all these good teams, the surprise Utah Jazz leading the Western Conference, the Trailblazers existing, Damian Lillard, he's still a star player. He's still playing at a high level. The Phoenix Suns, Nuggets, Grizzlies, Mavericks, Pelicans. These are all the teams that the Clippers would have to jump if they want to make a playoff run. And, can they win how many 7-game series? Again, you have to guarantee me I'm getting a fully healthy Kawhi Leonard. And I just don't think that exists anymore. I don't think we'll ever see that player. I think he's going to be out of his prime by virtue of injury.
Oh, but Kawhi Leonard's already out of his prime. I think this is where he's 32 years old and someone dealing with knee injuries. Like, the prime is past for Kawhi at this point, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that they can't be a highly successful team. I think where the difference is a matter of expectation and where you set the expectation.
But the expectation is set by the owner, and the owner, Steve Ballmer, set the expectation at championship. That's what he promised the Clippers whenever he took over that organization. He wanted to make the Lakers' little brother. And as much as the Lakers suck, the Lakers at least still have the one championship to hold to their name. They still have the 2020 bubble championship to hold to their name.
It's funny that you bring this up. I've had this debate so many times because I grew up in San Diego. You've got some Clipper fans, some Laker fans. Like, I've had this debate so many times where I'm like, man, I think if the Lakers had 9 awful, abjectly terrible seasons and one championship versus the Clippers, who have been, in my entire memorable lifetime, a beacon of stability that's made the playoffs 11 times in 13 seasons and made 1 conference finals and should have made 2 more if they don't choke. Like, I think I'd rather be the Clippers than the Lakers, even given the 1 championship. It seems more fun to be the Clippers.
You're in
than
the minority,
Lakers.
Man. And you have to admit you're in the minority on that, because championship moments are forever. And maybe it's because, to be frank, let's be honest, your organizations you root for or have a rooting interest for have not won a lot of championships in their time.
We're losers.
I can tell you, as someone who got to see my San Francisco Giants win 3 championships in my lifetime, it was amazing. Oh, any drug, any food, I'll trade it just for one more championship.
But this is a matter of expectation, is that I got that moment this year when the Padres beat the Dodgers. That was our championship moment. But this is the unique thing. Like, Steve Ballmer can...
Losing in the finals.
Doesn't matter what you say. It's about emotions.
NLCS. That's the equivalent of blue balls.
Don't care at all. There were no expectations. I got my championship. Nope, not if you have no expectations. But I will say, like,
you essentially jizzed in your pants at someone touching your leg. That's what the NLCS is.
Speaking of which, Steve Ballmer, someone who looks like he constantly has a jizz face, Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer can set the expectation at championship, but we as a discerning fan, I mean, I'm not a Clipper fan, but like a Clipper fan or an NBA analyst can just look at that and say, well, that's a stupid thing to do. You're full of shit. Your team can't win a championship. So like discernibly, like the Clippers are in this group of teams, like you just mentioned. I think you listed off 7 teams, like the Timberwolves, the Pelicans, the Mavericks, the Spurs, the Suns, the Warriors, the Nuggets. Like the Clippers are in that group, but I think the Clippers are just another team in that group, unless you have in its prime Kawhi Leonard. And even then, that might not be good enough to beat some of these teams. So I think if you set the expectation at we can win a playoff series, that's something you can do even without in his prime Kawhi Leonard, because Paul George is a very good player. You have Norman Powell, who has been an incredibly productive player coming over from Portland in a really weird fallout situation.
I mean,
there.
the Clippers have won playoff series, man. It's about doing something more, doing something you've never done before, striving to be the best. Isn't that what it's all about?
You can shoot for that, but let's be realistic about what the Clippers are at this point. Their path to the championship is in his prime Kawhi Leonard at this point. And
we are being realistic. We are being realistic about what it is. It just still a disappointment in the grand scheme of things. It's a disappointment in this chapter of Clippers basketball that this assembly of players that they organized was not able to pull down basketball's ultimate prize. And the Clippers, obviously, they've lived with their fair amount of disappointments. They thought the Blake Griffin, Chris Paul Clippers would have been like their path to a championship. That didn't happen. And now this is the next iteration of that. So what is the next iteration after that? Because this organization, again, they've won playoff series. They had that long streak without even making it into a Western Conference Finals that they finally were able to get past. But it's about doing something above yourself. I said the same argument with you about the Celtics last year. I've seen Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown make it to Eastern Conference Finals. I needed to see them make it to a NBA Finals just to see that they could do it. And obviously I want them to do more, but I needed to know that they still had that in their bag. I don't know what the Clippers have as an organization. If we're going to be here 100 years later and talk about the Clippers still never making a finals, I would like to think a big market team like the Clippers in Los Angeles with a owner that's committed to spending all the money, Steve Cohen-esque, move heaven and earth to make his team the best team in basketball. I would like to think that that is the formula you need to build a championship contender. But I will have to say that it's time that we officially hit that eject button on assuming that this team is going to be amongst the top tier. And I had already kind of hit that button at the start of the season when I said that I think the Grizzlies are better today than the Clippers. I know that you were a little hesitant to jump in because you assumed that we were getting back Kawhi Leonard. It just doesn't seem we're going to get that.
So this is an interesting point because we already saw, if you remove Kawhi Leonard from the equation, we saw what the Clippers were last year. They were 8th seed in the regular season that lost the play-in game to Minnesota and then lost another play-in game to the Pelicans. Like, we've seen what that is. So the jump from 9 to whatever you set the bar for the Clippers at, I think when we were doing our video, I said realistically 3rd or 4th. That's where I saw them in the Grizzlies, but in this scenario, I think Phoenix has kind of like surpassed them in the early part of the season. So like maybe it's 4 and 5 at this point. And if you're in that territory, you should expect to maybe win a first round playoff series. If injuries break right, maybe you make a conference final similar to what the Clippers did in 2021. But I think that's the best you can expect for the Clippers. And just adjust your expectations if you're a Clipper fan. Don't set the bar at championship. Adjust your expectations. It will be a more enjoyable experience for you as you read headlines about Kawhi Leonard's injury and get concerned about, hey, are we getting a diminished product going forward into 2024 and 2025? Because Kawhi Leonard is, as much as people with championship culture mentality are like, if it's not a title, we blow it up. More likely than not, Kawhi Leonard is going to be on the team the next 3 seasons. So if you take a longer term view, adjust your expectations a bit, I think it might be a more evidence-based, realistic approach. And I know fans don't like that because sports are emotional, but like, set the expectation in different places if we're not going to have a fully healthy Kawhi Leonard for extended periods of the season, or if he's going to have to spend the last 40 games of the season revving up for, say, a first round playoff series against Luka for the 3rd time in 4 years.
All right, guys. Well, maybe you're a Clippers fan and maybe you've had to deal with this headache all season. We'd like to hear from you. Get a little bit of therapy session in the comment section. Lay down on our couch and tell us all your life's problems. Leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all our social medias, all of the Slump Buster social medias, all of our personal social medias, which you can find in our YouTube bio. Stay safe, happy, and healthy. From Kyle Ledbetter and Juju. We'll see you next time.